Bedtime is supposed to be the happiest event for a tired child. For me, it was terrifying. While some children might complain about being put into bed before they finish watching a film or playing their favorite video game, when I was a child, nighttime was something to truly fear. Somewhere in the back of my mind, it still is. As someone who is trained in this science, I cannot prove that what happened to me was objectively real, but I can swear that what I experienced was genuine horror, a fear in which in my life, I'm glad to say, has never been equaled. I'll relate it to you all now as best as I can. Make of it what you will, but I'll be glad to just get it off my chest. I can't remember exactly when it started, but my apprehension towards falling asleep seemed to be correspond with my moving into a room of my own. I was 8 years old at the time. Until then I had shared a room quite happily with my older brother, as is perfectly understandable for a 5-year-old. My senior brother eventually wished for a room of his own, and as a result I was given my own room at the back of the house. It was a small, narrow, yet oddly a longing room, large enough for a bed and a couple of chests of drawers, but not much else. I could easily complain because even at that age I understood that we did not have a large house, and I had no real cause to be disappointed, as my family was both loving and caring. It was a happy childhood during that day. A solitary window looked out into the garden. Nothing out of the ordinary, but even during the day, which crept into the room seemed almost hesitant. As my brother was given a new bed, I was given the bunk airbeds, which we used to share. While I was upset about sleeping on my own, I was excited at the thought of being able to sleep in the top bunk, which seemed far more adventurous to me. From the very first night, I remember the strange feeling of unease creeping slowly from the back of my mind. I lay on the top bunk, staring down onto my action figures and cars strewn across the green-blue carpet. As imaginary battles and adventures took place between the toys on the floor, I couldn't help but feel that my eyes were being slowly drawn towards the bottom bunk, as if something was moving in the corner of my eye, something which did not wish to be seen. The bunk was empty, impeccably made with dark blue blank tucked in neatly, partially covering 2 rather bland white towels. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I was a child, and the noise slept under the door frame of my parents' television battered. I fell asleep. When you awaken from a deep, deep sleep to something moving or stirring, it can take a few moments for you to truly understand what is happening. The fog of sleep hangs over your eyes and the ears even when lucid. Something was moving. There was no doubt in that. At first, I wasn't sure what it was. Everything was dark, almost pitch black, but there was enough light creeping from the outside outline that nearly suffocated the room. 2 thoughts appeared in my mind almost simultaneously. The first was that my parents were in bed because the rest of the house was laid both in darkness and silence. The second thought turned into the noise, a noise which had obviously woken me. As the last cow beeps of sleep withered from my mind, the noise took over a more familiar form. Sometimes the simplest of sounds can be the most unnerving. A cold wind whistling through a tree outside, and neighbor footsteps uncomfortably close. Or in case the simplest sounds of bed sheets rustling in the dark. That was it. Bed sheets rustling in the dark as if some disturbing sleeper was attempting to get all too comfortable in the bunking bed. I lay there in disbelief, thinking that the noise was either my imagination or perhaps just my pet cat finding something comfortable to sleep at night. It was then that I truly noticed my door, shut as it has been when I fell asleep. Perhaps my mom had checked on me and the cat had sneaked into my room then. Yes, that must have been it. I turned my face to the wall, closing my eyes into the vain hope that I could fall back asleep. As I moved, the rustling noise from underneath kept caused. I thought that I must have disturbed the cat, but quietly I realized that the visitor in my bunk bottom bed was much less mundane than my pet trying to sleep, and much more sinister. As if I alerted to, and is strangled by, my presence, the disturbed sleeper began to toss and turn violently like a child having a tantrum in their bed. I could hear the sheets twist and turn with increased velocity. Fear then gripped me, not like a subtle sense of unease I'd experienced earlier, but more like a portent, as if I was terrified. My heart raced, my eyes panicked, scanning the most unbelievable scent of darkness. I let out a cry. As most young boys would do, I instinctively shouted to my mother. I could hear something stir on the other side of the bed, but I began to breathe and sigh for relief when my parents finally opened the door. They came to save me, and the bunk bed suddenly stopped shaking violently, as if I gripped the earthquake, scraping against the wall. I could hear the sheets below me thrashing around, as if tremendously by malins. I did not want to jump down by safety. I feared that the thing, whichever was in my bunk bed, would reach out and grab me, pulling me into the darkness. So I stayed there, white knuckles clenching onto my blanket like a shroud of protection. The wait seemed like an eternity. The door finally and thankfully burst open, and I lay bathed in the light while the bottom bunk just seemed restless, as if the unwanted visitor lay empty and peaceful. I cried and my mother consoled me. Tears of fear followed by relief streamed down my face, yet, to all the horror and relief, I did not hear why I was so upset. Neither did I tell her. I cannot explain it, but it was through whatever had been in that bunk bed would return if I even so much spoken of it, or uttered a single syllable of its existence. Whether that was the truth, I don't know, but as a child, I felt as if that unseen menace remained close, listening. My mother lay in the empty bunk, promised to stay there until the morning. Eventually my anxiety diminished. Tiredness pushed me back towards the bed, but I remained restless, waking several times momentarily to the sound of the rustling bedsheets. I remember the next day wanting to go anywhere, be anywhere, but in that narrow, suffocating room. It was a Saturday and I played outside quite happily. We were lucky to have such a long sloping garden in the back. We played there often, as much of it was overgrown. We could hide in the bushes, climbing the huge skymare tree which towered above everything else, and easily imagine ourselves in the throes of a grand adventure in some untamed exotic land. As fun as all was, occasionally my eye would turn to the small window, ordinarily slight and then nauseous, but for me, that thin boundary was looking glass into a strange, cold pocket of dread. Outside, the lush green surroundings of our garden, filled with the smiling faces of my friends, could not extinguish the creeping feeling crawling its way up my spine, each hair standing on end, the feeling of something in that room watching me play, waiting for that night when I could finally be alone, eagerly filled with hate. It may sound strange to you, but the time my parents ushered me back into the room for the night, I said nothing. I didn't protest. I didn't even make an excuse as to why I couldn't sleep there. I simply and silently walked into that room, climbed a few steps onto the top bunk, and then waited. As an adult, I would be telling everybody about my experience, but even at that age, I almost felt silly to talk about it with my parents. I really had no evidence for it. I would be lying, however, if I said this was my primary reason. I still felt that this would be enraged, if so much I even spoke of it. It's funny how certain words can remain hidden from your mind, no matter how bland or obvious they are. One word came to me the second night, lying there into the darkness alone, frightened, aware, scared of a rotten thing that changed the atmosphere. A thickening of the air as if something had displayed it. As I had the first casual twist of my bedsheets below, the first anxiety wave increased of my heartbeat at the realization that something was once again into the bottom bunk. That word, a word which has been sent into exile, filtered up through my consciousness, breaking free of all reprecision, gasping for air, screaming, etching, and carving itself into my mind. Ghost! As this thought came over me, I noticed that my unwilling visitor had ceased moving. The bedsheets lay calm and dormant, but they had been slowly replaced by something far more hideous. A sore or slow, rhythmic, rasping breath heaved and escaping from the thing below. I could imagine its chest rising and falling, with each sordid, wheezing, and grabbled breath. I shuddered, and I hoped beyond all hopes that it would leave without occurrence again. The house lay, as the previous night, in a thick blanket of darkness. Silently prevailed, all but for the perverted breath of my ghost. As yet unseen, my bunkmate, I lay there terrified. I just wanted this thing to go. Just leave me alone. What did it want? Then something unmistakably chilling transpired. It moved. It moved. It moved in a way different from before. When it threw itself around the bottom bunk, it seemed unrestrained, without purpose, almost animalistic. The movement, however, was driven by awareness, with purpose, with a goal in mind. For that thing laying there into the darkness, that thing which seemed to have an intent of terrorizing a young boy, calmly and nonchalantly set up. Its labored breath had become louder, and now only a mattress and a few flimsy wood slats separated my body from an unearthly breath below. I lay there, my eyes filled with tears, a fear which mere words cannot relate to, or anyone else for that matter, coursed between my veins. I would not have believed that this fear could have been heightened, but I was so wrong. I imagined that this thing would look like, sitting there, listening from below my mattress, hoping to catch the slightest hint that I was awake. I imagined that, turning to an unrelenting reality, it became to touch the wooden slats which my mattress sat on. It seemed to caress them carefully, running them, what I imagined to be fingers and hands across the surface of the wood. Then, with great force, I approached angrily between two slats into the mattress. Even through the padding, it felt as though someone had viciously tucked their fingers into my side. I let out an almighty cry, and the wheezing, shaking, and moving of that thing in the bunk below replied in kind by violently vibrating the bunk, as it had done the night before. Small flakes of paint powdered onto my blanket from the wall as the frame of the bed showered onto it, backwards and forwards, again and over again. Once again, I was bathed in light, and there stood my mother, loving, caring, as she always has, with a comforting hug and calming words which eventually subdued my hysteria. Of course, she asked what was wrong, but I could not say. I dared not to say. I simply said one word over and over again: nightmare.